Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is the last webinar in our three-part series on how to start, grow, and ultimately maintain a dominating law firm website. And today we're going to talk about the domination phase for bankruptcy attorneys. Just a few quick housekeeping matters before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available to replay online next week. And we'll also make the slides available so there's no need to take notes. We have a lot of ground to cover today. This webinar is scheduled to run for 2 hours. It may run a bit under or over, just depending upon how quickly we get through today's material. We won't be able to stop to answer questions during the presentation, but if you're having technical difficulties with the GoToWebinar audio or video, let us know via the chat area of the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll have a questions and answers session at the end of the presentation, so if you have questions along the way, please add them to the questions area or send us a public or private chat message, and we'll address it at the end of the webinar. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Victoria Blute and I'm the Community Manager here at LawLytics. My job is to keep attorneys on the cutting edge of web technologies and online legal marketing and to help you learn what works on the web. I come from a journalism background, and if you happen to be a frequent reader of our blog or a regular attendee of our webinars, you may recognize me. If you joined us for the first two webinars in this series, you'll recall that I went into great detail about how search engines work and about various types of content that lawyers should include when starting their website. And we also explored other ideas like how social media can work with your law firm's website to amplify your firm's signal, extend your reach, and to reinforce your reputation. If you attended the first webinar in this series, then you're likely already familiar with our other presenter as well. But if you're not, I just want to give you a quick introduction to her before we get started. Rachel Shalott holds a JD and a master's and practiced law before joining LawLytics. She's the Vice President of Content Operations, and she's in charge of all of our content operations, which produces millions of written words for our members' websites and blogs each year. And in the first two webinars in this series, Rachel demonstrated the basic building blocks of content to get law firms started in the right direction, and then built on that information in the Grow series to take you deeper into the strategy and the execution of growing a bankruptcy law web presence. And before Rachel and I present, I do want to also briefly introduce you to our CEO, Attorney Dan Jaffe, and I want to spend a bit of time on a few foundational items as well. Before Dan became the full-time CEO of LawLytics, he built two successful law firms in both Washington State and Arizona, and started a highly successful online legal directory that was later acquired by a large internet company. During Dan's years of practice, he himself will tell you that he made a lot of marketing investments, and he also got badly burned several times. And what this led him to realize was that nobody cared about his practice like he did, and that in order for him to succeed, he needed to understand how the internet functions, how potential clients were using the internet, and he needed to be in control of his marketing. So he did the heavy lifting to figure this out early on, and that's why he co-founded LawLytics, to make it easy for attorneys to be in control of their marketing without wasting their time or their money. And today he loves showing fellow attorneys how this stuff really works. I want to briefly review who we are, what we do, and why it matters. So you have many choices of companies and technologies to design, build, host, and help you market your law firm's website. At LawLytics, we do all of that, and we also have a lot of competition. So what is LawLytics and how are we different? Our company is obsessed with the pursuit of the most efficient method of marketing for each law firm. And there are two major variables of efficiency. There's time and there's money. And LawLytics was created to empower law firms to have unlimited marketing success without wasting time or money. And we have two different types of competitors. On the one side, we have full-service marketing companies like FindLaw and Martindale Nolo, and LawLytics is built to give attorneys all of the upsides of using a full-service company without exposing you to the potential risks and downsides. And on the other side are do-it-yourself website software programs like WordPress and Wix that are cheap or free to use. And these programs come with steep opportunity costs, and attorneys often struggle to make them work. And that has them wasting their time and missing opportunities along the way. So while both full-service companies and do-it-yourself platforms are viable options, LawLytics offers a more practical solution for lawyers. Our company works exclusively with attorneys, and our services are adaptable to every stage of a law firm's growth. Our members can start as small as they choose and grow as big as they decide without taking dangerous risks or committing to things that might not work. And because our software is built exclusively for lawyers, the learning curve is easy, and that enables our members to add to and edit their websites and turn their efforts into new business without struggling. So if you're joining us in this webinar after having seen the Start and Grow series for bankruptcy attorneys, then you probably have a good sense of where we might be headed. But for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, I want to give you the framework for where you are in this webinar to make sure that you're in the right place. This three-part series for bankruptcy attorneys lays out a clear roadmap for successful legal marketing because we recognize that the path to cost-effective and efficient law firm marketing online is often quite unclear for attorneys. And sometimes that's a problem of not knowing what to do or what works. And other times attorneys may understand what they need to do, but they're not sure how to do it. And then other times it's a matter of getting distracted by the latest trend or getting tripped up by SEO sales talk and other things that can keep you from your goals. But to do this right, we do recommend implementing the information that's in this series in chronological order. So here is a quick review of what was discussed in the first two parts of this series. In the Start series, we explained how to get your law firm started with a web presence, and that's whether you are brand new to online legal marketing or if you have a website but it's just not working for your firm. We laid the groundwork for marketing your bankruptcy law firm with sound and sustainable strategies and how to use that foundation to take your marketing where you want it to go. We explained the basics and showed you that to start smart, you need to be able to do just a couple things well. And so long as you avoid the traps and the tricks, that foundation will take you as far as you want. And then in the Grow series, we went over a variety of tools and tips that can assist you in your long-term content strategy, as well as how to understand the key performance indicators that help you market your firm effectively and without wasting time or money. We discussed also a lot of the vanity metrics that SEO salespeople and legal marketers sometimes use that can confuse attorneys and send them down the wrong path or just keep them on the hook without having anything real to show for it. And now we're at the Dominate phase, which is going to show you, as it says here, how to climb to the top and how to stay there without wasting your time or money, and also without having to watch your back. If you haven't seen the first two webinars in this series, that's okay. I certainly encourage you to stay and listen to what we have to say today, but I do also recommend that you go back and watch those first two webinars because, as I'm about to explain here, trying to implement these tactics out of order is unlikely to produce the kind of results that you want. It's about knowing what to do, how to do it, and in what order these things need to be done. So, a question that you may have thought about, or maybe you haven't yet, is this: when should I enter this phase? When am I ready to dominate my market? And the answer to that is based on several things. First, it's a matter of understanding the fundamentals and applying them, and that's why you'll hear me and Rachel keep stressing that if you haven't seen those first two webinars in this series, go back and watch them. And it's not just a knowledge is power aspect here. It's knowledge and action that matters. Knowing what's going to move the needle is one thing. Actually applying those fundamentals to your law firm's web presence consistently over time is another. So make sure that you have that solid content foundation for your law firm's website and blog, and that you have a plan and a strategy as you're moving forward. The next thing that's worth considering when you're wondering when you'll be ready to enter this particular phase of your law firm's growth is looking at some data that's related to your law firm's web presence. How many visits is your site getting? And this isn't a cut and dry number for every law firm out there. Your geography is going to play a part in this as well. So, for example, if you're part of a smaller market, you might be ready to start thinking about dominating your market if you're getting 200 visits a day. However, if you are in a much larger and much more competitive market, somewhere like Los Angeles or New York, this number might shoot up to 1,000 visits a day before you're ready to start thinking about this phase. So knowing your total addressable market is important as well. And if you were with us for the second part of this webinar series, you probably heard Dan and I discuss this concept when we were talking about growth risks in terms of attorneys who are sometimes focused on what is ultimately an unsupportable market. They're trying to squeeze more business out of it than the market really supports. But the bottom line there is that it's essential to know what your total addressable market is and then optimize your marketing for that reality. So we have attorney members here at LawLytics who are now in the dominate phase after following our advice from the start and grow webinars and who have avoided the traps and the tricks that so often get attorneys into trouble. And their websites are now receiving tens of thousands of visits a month and often thousands of visits in a day. So whether you are a LawLytics member right now or you're thinking about becoming one and you want a roadmap for how to get there, reach out to us and we'll put together a comprehensive plan for your firm that can help you achieve those goals. So at LawLytics, there are a couple of things that we firmly believe. The first is that having a law firm website that you own and that you control, when you pair that with an investment in a solid content strategy, that can become an appreciating asset for you and your firm. And we also see it that there are two things that you can invest into your online marketing, and in particular, your law firm website and blog. One is money, the other one is time. And as it often goes in life, there's a chance that you'll have more of one than the other, just depending on where you are in the growth phase of your firm. So let's first consider the case of a young attorney who is just starting out. This young attorney may not have a lot of money, they may not have a lot of clients yet, but what they might have is time. And therefore, writing their own content can be a smart investment of the time that they have available to them. As we've said previously, the internet is really the great equalizer, and marketing has become a meritocracy. You don't have to have the biggest budget in the game anymore in order to compete. So if this young attorney happens to have more time available than money, if they have a solid content plan and a clear roadmap, then they can use their time wisely to produce their own substantive content and blog posts, and that'll put their firm on the board and help them get noticed by potential clients. Now, as they move along and their business starts to grow, they're going to have more clients and they'll be making more money. And at this point, they may want to still continue writing their content, but they might also choose to delegate a little bit of their content as well, even if they continue adding to their website. Here's the problem. As you grow, particularly as you're taking on more and more clients, writing your content has an opportunity cost. So as you're growing and growing, you're suddenly going to have some serious demands placed on your time. And it's why we mentioned in the last webinar that it's worth thinking about things like intake systems and so on before you get to this point, because you don't want to let yourself get overwhelmed. But one of the things that you're going to have to think about as these demands are placed on your time is the opportunity cost of writing your own content. The choice that has to be made between what is often mutually exclusive, money or time. So to illustrate this point, let's look at how our content creation department here at LawLytics actually evolved. When LawLytics first started, our early adopters were very excited about writing content. For the first time, they had access to a system that would not only allow them to easily publish optimized content to their own websites and blogs, they had our system to make sure that they were doing it well. Attorneys who use LawLytics to write their own content and who follow our recipe over time are successful and they achieve market-leading results. And as a byproduct of this success, they become busier in their practices. And this presents a catch-22 for attorneys who also would like to sleep and have a work-life balance. So they know that the content that they're writing using LawLytics is fueling their success, but then their success is preventing them from continuing to write or demanding other sacrifices. So in order to keep up with the reward cycle of writing content, many of our early adopters here realized that in order to sustain that edge that they were getting through content writing using LawLytics, they needed to delegate that task to somebody else. And our content creation department evolved out of that particular need. So the more clients you've got, the less time you have to keep writing content. And you can't just stop writing content. Having new content added to your site is an important factor that Google takes into consideration for rankings and relevancy. And the freshness of your content is something that Rachel is going to discuss in depth shortly. But to keep the flywheel moving, you have to have new content. And if new demands are being placed on your time and you can't write it because you want to be focus on the practice of law, your rankings could suffer, which would then likely harm your revenue, and the whole thing can fall apart. So it's a complicated dance because, of course, you want to keep up that momentum that you've worked so hard for. And this is where that other investment comes into play, money. So if you are in the dominate phase, you have a marketing budget to work with that is likely larger than what a beginning attorney would have. You may not have the time to write anymore, but you do have the money. And here's where it may be time to delegate your content creation efforts to somebody else. Now, before I get into how to do this wisely, there's a couple points that I want to make. The first is on the ethics of ghostwriting. So there is a camp of purists on the web who argue that attorneys should always, under all circumstances, write their own content for their law firm websites and blogs. And in an ideal world, we agree with that. But in the real world, where balancing a practice with the business side of law while trying to maintain a quality of life, you can see where I'm going with this. Those who argue against proxy writing of online content will point out that if the attorney doesn't write their own website content, it lacks authenticity, or that the content misleads readers into believing the content came directly from the attorney. Some will argue that it's unethical. Some assert that all lawyers are natural writers or love writing, or should not only provide the content for their websites, but should enjoy doing so. And each of these arguments contains logical and practical fallacies. We've gone into greater detail about the ethics of ghostwriting in a webinar that is available on demand over at the LawLytics website, and that specifically addresses this topic. But my point is this. If you are comfortable delegating the creation of a brief, proofreading it, and then signing your name onto it and submitting it to the court, the analogy is exactly the same when a ghostwriter is writing content for you. Now, in order to use a ghostwriter successfully, it comes down to a couple things. You have to be able to delegate wisely. You have to empower people who understand and who will abide by the necessary ethics. And you also have to keep a level of editorial control that makes you feel comfortable saying that as the attorney who's responsible for the content on your website, you know what's been published. So by choosing a professional writer that you can hold accountable, you can maintain a consistent publishing schedule, which ensures that your website and blog won't be neglected. We have seen plenty of law firm websites that have these large bursts of content creation. I think especially on blogs, we'll see 10 posts in a month, and then the blog just goes completely dormant for months or years. And the problem is that content marketing isn't optimally effective when you simply put some content on your blog and then just quit. It works best with the consistent publication of posts that answer your clients' questions in detail. So it's easy to get enthusiastic about blogging for short periods of time, but that's harder to sustain in terms of enthusiasm over the long term. Persistence with blogging and other forms of content creation on your law firm's website on a regular basis is what is going to get you ahead. So if you pause your blogging efforts, your competition who isn't pausing, whether that is a well-funded firm who's delegating their content to writers, or like in the earlier example, an attorney who's fresh out of law school with all the time in the world to blog, they will get ahead of you if you're not adding content to your law firm's website and blog on a regular basis. So just a couple last things before I hand this over to Rachel. There's something I want to briefly point out. If you are a LawLytics member or you've been with us for a few webinars, then you know how easy it is to use LawLytics to add to and edit your website. And what we also make it easy to do is allow you to delegate those tasks to others, such as in the case that you have a partner or an associate who's going to blog. But on top of that, we also make it easy for you to have control in the case where you hire a professional proxy writer. The LawLytics user access controls that are featured in our control panel make delegating this work to others a total breeze, and that's without relinquishing the kind of control that attorneys do need to have over their web presence. As you can see here in this slide, you can add an unlimited number of users, and then for each user, indicate who that person is ghostwriting for. So as you can see in this example, we have a summer associate who is going to ghostwrite for Dan here. And as you can see as well, that little blue checkbox there that says requires approval before publishing, that makes sure that you have control over what goes on your website, even if you have somebody else ghostwriting for you. And there are additional permissions that you can select as well to ensure that the person who is ghostwriting for you has as little or as much access to other things like your sites, if you have multiple websites, your blog posts, your case results, your social media, and so on and so forth. And if you're curious to learn more about the effective use of ghostwriters, I do really recommend checking out a webinar that we did on that subject a little while ago that I mentioned earlier. The web address to access that is at the bottom of your screen there. One last point that I want to make to you is this. Your time is valuable, and especially so if you're in the domination phase of your law firm's growth. The quality content that you add to your law firm's website on a regular basis is really the key to starting and growing a successful web presence and ultimately dominating your market. But if you can't write for your website on a regular basis, then using a professional proxy writer is really the next best choice that you can make. And as I said earlier, the LawLytics content department evolved out of that very specific need. Attorneys who had been writing their own content and as a result of it got so successful that they needed help to keep publishing. And today we're writing millions of words of content for attorney websites and blogs. And Rachel Shalott, who is going to speak to you in just a moment, is the Vice President of Content Operations, and she oversees this entire effort. But before I turn it over to her, I do want to talk briefly about our content creation services for those who are interested. So we have an in-house content creation department that's managed by lawyers. Many of our writers are lawyers. All of them have strong writing and legal backgrounds. And all of the content that gets published on behalf of our customers who choose us to write for them goes through an editorial process where lawyers look at it before it ever gets published. We have several levels of content creation that we provide, and these are services ranging from startup content where you have a brand new site that doesn't have any content to get it off the ground, to creating attorney bios or practice areas and so forth. And that goes all the way up to these really extensive build-outs of over 1 million words for attorneys who, over the course of a year or more, want to build a dominating website for a certain practice area or practices or for certain geographic areas. But between those two extremes, we also have a la carte content. So say you're writing your own content and you have something coming up and you're not going to be around to write and you don't want to have a lag in your content. We can jump in, pick up where you left off, and sustain that until you can jump back in and start working again. And we also have the ability to do ongoing recurring monthly blogging and content creation for our clients. What I want to say here is that at LawLytics, we really pride ourselves on having more than just a vendor-customer relationship with you. We take a lot of time at the outset to get to know you and to create a partnership that allows you to participate as little or as much as you want in the creation of your law firm website content. We want to know how you like your content written as far as voice goes. We want to know your objectives. We want to get to know your practice area. We look at what you are trying to accomplish and what you've already accomplished, and then we make a plan to get there. So that's it for my part of this webinar in the first part. I'm now going to turn it over to Rachel Shalott, who is going to tell you a little bit more about building on your content. Rachel?
Thank you, Victoria. As you just heard, I oversee the LawLytics content department, and we work with our attorney clients to plan, create, and refine their web content. When we work with firms who have a really dominating site, we generally see content structured in the following ways. First off, there's a substantial base of what we call evergreen or substantive pages. If you were with us during our Grow session, I discussed achieving a target size for your market area. Over the past few years, we've been conducting market research to see what makes attorney sites that are utilizing organic content marketing really successful in a variety of metro areas across the United States. And when we do that, we look at a variety of different practice areas. And the one constant we always observe is that the really dominating sites have the highest page volume for the market area. And this includes all of the practice area pages, reputational pages, and local pages. The best thing about organic content marketing is that this base that you create is going to be your single most valuable asset, and you're going to get an incredibly high ROI. The bulk of time and resources will go into your initial content build. And that's not to say it won't be quite a substantial undertaking. When we've executed builds where we're really achieving market domination, they have lasted anywhere from 18 months to 3 years. But the reason why this investment is absolutely worth it is because the value from this content build will only grow and grow in the future. Once you've achieved a substantial size, you can kind of shift from a creation or addition phase to what we think of as an enhancement or maintenance phase. And what I mean by enhancing your website is that you're going to start adding collateral to the site that really increases the appeal to potential clients and visitors. We will discuss potential enhancements to your site, including infographics and white papers, in just a few moments. Next, these sites employ a blogging strategy to keep their site fresh and up to date. Finally, they utilize a sophisticated sharing strategy to get their content to the widest possible audience and to establish solid personal connections with that audience. Right now, I'd like to turn to blogging and focus on that a little bit more in detail. Blogging can really serve a variety of purposes. Blog content can be shared via social media, which increases the range of your potential audience. Blog content also has the potential to be interactive. That is, potential clients, others in the field, they can read your blog post and comment, opening up new channels of communication with your firm. However, we sometimes see firms who neglect blogging because they think if their blog content doesn't have a certain level of activity on social media, or if their blog posts don't receive a certain amount of comments, it really isn't doing anything for them. Now, this line of thinking is problematic because it neglects another critical role that blog content can play for a site, and that is to keep the site fresh. Reaching a desired build of your evergreen pages is very important to establishing your site as an authority in a particular area, and the size of your site is going to be instrumental in getting those strong search engine rankings. But as we see here in this excerpt from Google's Search Engine Optimization Starter Guide, it is important that your content is not only unique, but also that it is fresh. And this doesn't mean you need to make regular drastic changes to your site. And we know the law doesn't always change that quickly to even allow for something like that. However, we have seen that even sites which are dominating a major market area, they can kind of go stagnant if nothing is added to the site for a particular period of time, That is, they can start to slip in the rankings, and the search engines will start to favor newer sites, even those that tend to be maybe a little bit smaller. And this is really where blogging comes in for a dominant site. Blogging will help to keep your site appearing fresh to search engines and will help maintain that strong ranking. We've found that adding a few blog posts per week can really help to prevent any type of decline in rankings. Additionally, blogging can serve as a base for forming connections with your target audience, be it current, former, and/or potential clients. Your blog content can be a rich source of shareable material to use not only across your social media platforms, but also you can take that a step further and engage in direct marketing. And we've seen a lot of firms be very successful with direct email newsletters. These are sent to a list generated from current, former clients, and/or those who took a subscription action on a site. And these newsletters allow your firm to showcase content you think would be especially relevant or interesting. And again, it helps you form a deeper personal connection with your audience. And now I'd like to transition to discussing substantive pages when you're in this dominating position. There are two things I'd like to address, and the first is enhancing your site volume. When you've reached the dominant phase, your site contains a multitude of pages that directly relate to your practice area and the services that your firm offers. If you're with us in our earlier web series, you may have heard me caution against attorneys using any of their valuable time or resources to cover topics that don't directly relate to what your firm does. But once we've reached, or we're really striving to reach, this very, very dominant position, I really do change my tune here. Now is the time to start adding these pages. Pages that are basically educational in nature and that they don't directly relate to a service that you will be providing for a potential client. So for example, you might have a local program that helps veterans deal with financial management issues, or programs that help people with student loan debt learn more about consolidation or different payment plans. If you're just starting out or you're starting to grow your site, you don't want to waste any time or resources on covering a topic from which you probably aren't going to obtain clients, or you're not going to get revenue directly from that. So we wouldn't include these in an initial content plan. However, once we've comprehensively covered everything related to the types of cases that you do take, you have the ability, and you totally should, start to branch out and cover related topics. What this is doing is it's going to add to the overall authority for your site in a particular area. Again, the breadth of ancillary topics you should be covering is going to be consistent with your market. So this is going to depend on your geographic location. If you're in an urban area, a lot of competition, that's going to be very different than if you're in a small rural area and there are only a few, bankruptcy firms around. So there's no one-size-fits-all rule for this. Your market's always going to dictate the amount necessary, and that goes for that initial build, and that goes for enhancing that volume, all of those things. It's all going to be governed by your particular unique circumstances. And I also wanted to mention briefly updating your substantive pages. The reason why we label these pages evergreen is that the content on them is unlikely to change. However, changes in state or federal legislation can necessitate an update of your site. For example, let's say that your state legislature has changed the single earner income threshold for filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And when you have a very, very large site, it can be really difficult to locate every instance where you've referenced this particular statute where you might have that old amount. So one of the things we recommend that firms do, especially when they're going to get to this really large size, is create some type of resource. Spreadsheet is a really easy way to do this, where you're sort of keeping an index of where, in terms of which pages, you have particular statutory information. That way, if there is a change or you hear an announcement that a change is coming up, you can really easily locate these pages and create a game plan for updating them. And I want to move now to speaking about these site enhancements that I mentioned earlier. There are different types of collateral you can add to your site which will really enhance the experience of a user visiting your site. There are many different forms this can take, including ebooks, but I'm going to take some time right now to talk about two particular types that we've seen be very, very successful with different firms. And those are white papers and infographics. White papers are typically about 3 to 7 pages in length, and they cover a particular topic in great detail. So for example, you might create a white paper that gives a really comprehensive overview of how bankruptcy will affect various types of assets, various types of accounts. And these documents can serve a multitude of purposes. They can be an educational resource for a visitor to your site who really wants a nuanced understanding of a particular topic. But we've also worked with many firms who use white papers kind of in a more traditional sense as a print resource. Some firms mail relevant packets to clients who come in for an initial consultation, and others take white papers and leave them for distribution in an area where they think they might have potential clients. Now, as far as density of information goes, infographics are kind of on the far end of the spectrum from white papers. They illustrate concepts in graphical form, with the focus much more on the visual depiction rather than text. For example, you might create an infographic that sort of walks an individual through each step in the bankruptcy process and what they can expect. Infographics greatly enhance the experience a visitor has on your website because they capitalize upon the strong preference many users have for visual information. And they also work very, very well with what we're observing and have observed over the past few years, and that's kind of the shortening of that attention span when people are looking for information online. As we're moving more to mobile devices, we're moving more to tablets, people want to get more information in a shorter amount of time, and infographics speak very well to this. Additionally, infographics are highly shareable and can be incredibly popular on social media. Now, there are tools available for creating free infographics, but I did want to mention a word of caution. The most effective infographics and white papers follow the branding guidelines of your firm. If you were with us in some earlier webinars, you heard Sophia, who's our senior graphic designer, talk about how it's very, very important that your colors and your logo remain consistent across advertising platforms. So be that a billboard, your website, a pen, other promotional materials. You want to make sure that this looks the same because that consistency helps your information stick in the minds of your audience. So when you're creating things like infographics or white papers, you need to make sure that not only your logo remains consistent, but that your colors, the colors outlined in your branding guidelines, are paired with complementary colors. Now, I mean complementary in terms of palette, but also complementary in terms of colors that are used appropriately to evoke a desired response from your audience. Another thing Sophia discussed in our earlier webinars was the psychological element of colors. Different colors have been found to evoke different emotional responses. And this is something that should absolutely be taken into account when you're creating these types of collateral for your site. It is very difficult to use a free template system and maintain consistency with your brand guidelines, as well as ensuring the use of complementary colors, and therefore it's something that we generally advise against. For those on the LawLytics platform, the same team of graphic and web designers who imported and configured or who created your logo will be responsible for the creation of things such as white papers and infographics, so we can ensure that all the visual elements are consistent and that they're embedded seamlessly in your website and they perform appropriately on desktop and mobile. So when you're just starting out or when you're growing your site, your focus is really going to be on content creation because the goal is getting more visitors to your site. But once you are getting those really high visitor numbers, you're going to be competing against other sites who are also doing very, very well, who are also getting high number of visitors. So what the goal is when we've reached this phase is we want to give the user a very memorable, a very positive, and a very unique experience. And that's where collateral really matters. So another thing I wanted to touch on is handling major changes. When you've reached the phase where you really are dominating a market area, chances are you will experience some changes along the way. These might be minor, such as adding a junior associate, or they might be major, such as bringing on new partners, changing the name of your firm, or planning a major expansion. When you're faced with a major change, it's really critical to keep your web presence in mind and develop a plan of action as early as you're able to, just as you might plan and execute other necessary steps for a change, like leasing office space. If your firm will be experiencing a change in name, will you keep your logo the same? Oftentimes, a logo change might be necessary when there's a change in the partnership because partner initials are a common element of law firm logos. If you are going to change your logo, will you change the other graphic elements in your branding guidelines? Will your colors change, or do you want them to remain the same? And if you're expanding to a new office location, does this warrant additional web content? Do you need to add a new section to your site? When do you want to do that? Do you want to have that going and launch to be simultaneous? Do you want to open the location and then start to grow? Do you need to perform a comprehensive review of all of your existing calls to action, which appear at the bottom of your web pages, to make sure that the new geographic information is properly communicated to any potential client? And if you're faced with a very sudden change, such as a partner or an associate leaving to start a rival firm, how will you handle this as far as your website is concerned? And one of the chief reasons we design LawLytics to give the attorney such a high degree of control is to empower you to be able to quickly make changes to things such as your attorney staff should you be faced with a major change. You can easily unpublish one page or page groups if you need to make some unanticipated changes and have information that you don't want live on your site during that time. So it's a good idea to keep these things just on your radar and sketch out a tentative plan of action for how you would tackle potential changes should they arise in the future. One change that I mentioned that I do want to get into more detail about, and we see very commonly when firms are doing really, really well, and that's expansion. Firms who are kind of dominating a particular market now have the ability to expand into new geographic regions. Sometimes this can be a new metro area, sometimes an additional state or a tri-state area, sometimes even nationwide expansion. When you're preparing for an expansion, there are some concerns related to your web presence that you should address. Again, much like when you're facing a change, this is something you should develop a plan of action as early as you possibly can. A common concern when facing expansion is often how to add new content for a new region. We've seen firms integrate new geographic areas into existing sites very successfully. We've also seen the launch of multiple sites be an effective tactic as well. And there are a variety of concerns to weigh when you're deciding kind of how you want to proceed with this. First off, there might be ethical complications. For example, some states require particular disclaimer language to be located somewhere on every web page in your site. Other states require that content be submitted to the state's bar for review prior to publication. In these circumstances, if having separate sites helps you to ensure compliance with the state bar, then this might be the best route to take. However, some firms choose to create separate sections for new geographic regions in their existing site. And doing this can add to the overall authority of the site, as well as allow the new sections to benefit from the strong presence of the existing content. Taking on a new practice area can present similar issues. Incorporating a new practice area on your site can have the benefit of your established presence. But if you're seeking to highlight one element of your firm in particular, it might be that having multiple sites is warranted. Finally, many dominant firms engage in what I'll call informational expansion. And this is when firms aren't expanding into new jurisdictions, but the information on their website covers many regions. For example, you might have a section on your site that compares income thresholds for bankruptcy in all 50 states. Even though you're not planning on expanding to all 50 states, doing this opens up new avenues for you to be able to make the site visit experience more rich for the user in terms of integrating elements such as a clickable map. And you're also establishing your firm as the ultimate authority on a particular subject. So to wrap up, if you have more specific questions regarding content for your site, I really encourage you to shoot us an email at writing@lawlytics.com. Some of you might already be familiar with her, but Alyssa Rhodes is the director of our content services. And over the past couple of years, she's helped many attorneys plan and create content. So if you have a brief question, you want some additional resources, or assistance with planning for the long term, we're always more than happy to help. And I'm now going to turn the mic back over to Victoria, who's going to cover a few more important elements before we wrap up for the day.
Thanks, Rachel. So a few last things that I want to mention before we complete this webinar, and one of them is the risks that you face at this stage of your growth. Some of these will be familiar to you if you've been with us for the first two parts of this webinar series, and some of the risks that you'll face at this stage might be new. Bad practices is the first one, and this is a risk to you at any point throughout your law firm's growth, but in this stage, it can be particularly dangerous because of all the work that you've put in already and all of the progress that you've made. And bad practices here can include things that you do yourself or things that you may not know are being done on your behalf. Bad links are one of those things that can cause trouble. Other things like duplicate pages and duplicate content. But if you need a refresher on all of the bad practices that can get you into trouble with Google, I definitely recommend that you go check out Google's Webmaster Guidelines just to make sure that you stay on the right side of things. And if you have somebody else handling some aspect of your web presence, that you also know what's being done and why, and whether that's in line with what Google expects. Algorithm changes. So this one is related to the first one to some degree, because if you've been engaging in bad practices, particularly ones that go against Google's Webmaster Guidelines, then you could be in trouble the next time that Google makes an algorithm change. Keep in mind that at scale, bad practices are amplified. So the more visible you are, plus whatever bad practices you engage in, that can mean it's more likely for someone to report your practices to the authorities, and the more likely it is that all of the work that you've done up to this point can come tumbling down. But when you have a solid content strategy, one that focuses on providing value and giving useful information to your potential clients, and when you understand the rules of Google, you're not going to have to sweat the next time Google makes an algorithm change. You will know that what you are doing is on the right track. The target on your back. So I recognize that that sounds kind of ominous, but the higher you climb and the more success that you have, the more that you may find that others are going to try to copy what you're doing. And that includes sometimes downright copying your content. And the thing is that the content that you create may not only attract potential clients, it may also attract your competitors. And that can be really frustrating after all of the work that you've put in to create this work that's original and useful for your potential clients, you know, to have somebody come along and copy it for their own website. Now, if you find that someone is stealing your content, there are some things that you can do. First, there are definitely tools that you can use for detection in the first place. Google Alerts is a good one. Copyscape is another one. But if you do find your work elsewhere on the web, there are some tactics that you can employ. The first thing that you may want to try to do is pick up the phone and call the attorney who's copying your content. And this is something we've talked a lot about in this webinar series, about things that are done for attorneys by legal marketers and webmasters and copywriters that the attorneys who hire them may not even know about. And this could be a case like that. It's possible that this attorney hired someone and that person lifted your content for this attorney's site. So calling the attorney directly can sometimes resolve this issue. And it doesn't hurt either to follow up your phone call with an email maybe, which can provide you with a record of your request and what was said. But if that doesn't work, either you cannot reach the person by phone, you cannot reach them by email, or they just downright refuse to remove the content, there's always the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or the DMCA. And a DMCA takedown is where content is removed from a website at the request of the owner of that content or the owner of the copyright of that content. But at the end of the day, keep in mind that your time is valuable. You only have so much of it, and if you spend too much time running around after people who are copying your work, then that's going to take away from your ability to produce even more content for your site. And perhaps more importantly, it may keep you from being focused on your practice. So it's a balance. Lastly is sabotage. And sabotage can show up in a variety of different forms. Of the many reasons we caution against using PPC to carry your law firm's marketing, there's click fraud to think about with pay-per-click. So if a competitor knows that you're using pay-per-click, they might just click on your ads because they can, which of course costs you money without anything to show for it. And as we've said in previous webinars, PPC comes with some risks in that the people who are clicking on your ads, they might be accidental clicks, they might be potential clients, but they also might be competitors. And whether or not that person is an actual potential client who may actually convert, once that money is gone, it's gone. Another form of sabotage that could come up, though it would take an extraordinary amount of time and effort on the part of whoever was responsible, is submitting your site to link farms and directories that have been sources of spam. I will say this, that once you are really well established, as you would be at the domination phase of growth, and you've got these huge content build-outs with millions of words and tons of useful information for your potential clients, and you're generating a lot of revenue from that work, if someone were to do that, it would be established pretty quickly that you were likely not responsible for such a thing. It just would not make sense that you would do something like that after all of the work that you've put in and all of the success that you've generated. However, one of the more likely methods of sabotage would be a competitor who hires someone or a company to try and smear your reputation. And that's why we really stress, as we did in the last webinar, to get on top of your reputation management early. Ask for those reviews often. Start building those resources early on. And here at LawLytics, we do offer a Bird Eye Reputation Management add-on for our attorney members, and we also offer it to our non-members as well, just not as deeply discounted as it is with our membership. So if you're curious about that, we recently did a webinar on the subject of reputation management that also covers a little bit about Bird Eye, and that's now available to view on demand over at our website. The last thing that I want to bring up is what could be described as the 1% difference makers. But before I discuss what they are, I want to mention why it's important to implement these difference makers now and not at some earlier point in your foundation and growth strategies. This is one of those things that can trip up attorneys. This is an area where attorneys sometimes want to obsess over implementing these things right out of the gate, but if you do that, they're not going to have the effect that they might if you do them once the foundation has been established. So let's talk about what they are. The first one is semantic markup. If you're not familiar with this term, semantic markup refers to the code that's used to reinforce the meaning of your web pages to search engines, which can help them be found when potential clients make relevant searches. Of course, humans have eyes. We can look at something like a web page and make a determination about what that web page means or what it's about, but search engines can't do that. And therefore, the markup helps a search engine understand what a page is about and whether that's relevant to somebody's interests when they make a relevant search. And with LawLytics, our system automatically adds attorney-specific markup that is strategic and effective and helps your work get found by potential clients. And it also doesn't require you to quit your day job to learn how to code or anything like that. Next up is page speed. Again, this is one of those issues that attorneys sometimes obsess about. And we brought it up in the Grow webinar series for bankruptcy attorneys, but I'm going to bring it up again just because I think it's valuable to understand what role this plays in your law firm's web presence. I will reiterate just briefly what was discussed in the last webinar, and that's this. If you were to have a completely blank website, plain white page, that is a site that is likely to score a perfect score on a site speed calculator. Of course, you can't really do much with a blank page. It's useless. But as you keep adding elements to a site, you're going to see a decrease in site speed. And if you add a lot of heavy elements like unnecessary bells and whistles, then you're really going to see that number drop. So what we explained in that webinar, if you didn't join us for it, that it's about striking the balance between having a completely empty website, which wouldn't do you any good, and a site that's overloaded with elements that slow it down. Now, once you're at the domination phase of your growth, there's something else to consider here. Where site speed is concerned, so long as your site is reasonably fast, so we're talking 70th percentile, 80 in mobile, it doesn't make too much of a difference. However, if you are getting 15,000 visits a day, some of those are going to come from mobile on a 3G connection, which could mean a slow loading site. And as we know, if a site loads too slowly, a potential client's first line of defense is just to leave and go elsewhere, to go find another site that answers their question. So getting big numbers means that there's something else additional that you have to balance. Not just the elements of the site anymore, but the number of visitors that you're receiving. Marketing automation. When you have just a few visitors at first, your goal should be to get visitors to your site. But as your site grows and as your visits grow, you're going to want to build up your options. It's not going to be enough anymore to have your options be basically contact my firm or leave. I mean, that's not even enough in the early phases. You really want to give your potential clients lots of text information about their case or matter or problem. But when you start hitting those big numbers, then it's time to start thinking about a variety of ways to present that information, like what Rachel was talking about with ebooks, white papers, other collateral, newsletter subscriptions. And while you have to create those yourself or hire somebody to do those for you, sending these items to potential clients are things that can be handled quite efficiently by marketing automation software. And I've written blogs over on the LawLytics blog about a number of popular marketing automation software tools for attorneys. So if you're interested in that, go check those out. But that way, once you've done the work or you've hired someone to do that work of creating that collateral, then you can use marketing automation software to send it for you and to create that connection between you and your client, even when it's outside of office hours and you're already home. Marketing automation can really help you do more work and reach more clients around the clock. Experimenting with CTAs. So when you're at the biggest phase of your growth, as you would be in the domination phase, then you can start experimenting with things like calls to action that you feature on your website. So try different action words, try different phrasing, see what draws in more clients. Form fields are another good thing to experiment with. So your potential clients are busy just as you are, and they don't want to have to do any more work than what's necessary to reach you. So where you can, see if you can edit down your form fields to whatever is just absolutely necessary. And there was a good example of this recently in the news with Expedia, in fact. And on the one hand, this is a story about how to root out hidden profits with analytics as well, but Expedia discovered an interesting problem. They were noticing that they had many customers who were clicking their Buy Now button, but then these customers never went on to complete their transaction. So what was happening? Here we have people who, as far as leading indicators of purchase intent go, they said, appeared to be ready to finish that transaction, but they didn't. So when Expedia conducted their research, what they found was something that was actually oddly simple. Expedia had an optional field in one of their forms under name, which was company. And what happened was that they discovered it was confusing customers who filled out that company field with their bank name. So after they'd put in their bank name, these customers then went on to enter the address of their bank rather than their home address. So when it came time to verify their credit card, it would fail because it wasn't the address of the card holder. So when Expedia fixed this problem, they actually increased their profits by $12 million. And this, of course, is an extreme example, but my point here is to minimize any sort of user error or frustration that might happen with your form fields. Don't make your potential clients work any harder than they have to. Later, Expedia had said that they found a number of other issues like this by A, using their data to their advantage, and B, also by really paying attention to their customers. Setting expectations on your form is another thing. So if you say that if you are going to return calls in 5 minutes, and as a solo practitioner that works for you starting out, but as things grow, that's just not true anymore. It's the difference between either not being able to meet that expectation and changing the expectation on that form or on your website, or having a better intake system with 2 or 3 people available to answer the telephone for you. Last thing is call tracking. So at LawLytics, we can help you integrate things like CallRail, which can help you measure your calls and see where they're coming from so you can see what's driving them and then use that information to fine-tune your marketing even more. So this is the last webinar in our Start, Grow, Dominate series for bankruptcy attorneys. And again, if you missed the first 2 webinars, feel free to go check them out over on the LawLytics website, or for that matter, any of our other free on-demand webinars and blog posts. All of those resources are available to you for free to help you better understand how the internet works and how your potential clients are using it to find you. If you have questions about your legal marketing or you're ready to take your online marketing to the next level, we are here to help and we're happy to talk with you. So feel free to contact us through any of the following methods here. You can submit a consultation request from our main website at www.lawlytics.com. You can always call us at 800-713-0161, or you can shoot us an email at info@lawlytics.com. And with that, I'd like to thank Rachel for her presentation today, and I'm going to go ahead and end the recording of the webinar and go to questions.